Consecration Titan will always get the job done, but it gets really repetitive. Instead, let's get some lightning going. The main idea of this build is to use our CC and damage resist to get close range, charge up devastating punches, and level the battlefield using jolts and shatters. This build is catered to any difficulty with enough defense to stand your ground against GM level enemies once you master the pattern of play. Expect to have well over 95% damage resist most of the time. The in-depth math on how we get there will be timestamped below, but to give a short breakdown, this is what the damage resist formula looks like. Very cool, very math. And this is how tanky you'll actually be in real time. Before we get to the core of the build, Point Contact Cannon Brace, let's quickly discuss why we're picking the base exotic over Spirit of Contact on our Prismatic class item. Firstly, Spirit of Contact works on any Prismatic Titan melee, but we want to use Thunderclap for its high upfront damage, massive 80% damage resist, and sick as hell animation. Secondly, Spirit of Contact only gives us a little bit more on-hit arc damage and jolts. Point Contact Cannon Brace itself gives Thunderclap more damage and jolt, lightning strikes that zap enemies around you in all directions whenever we use our melee, double damage on those lightning strikes when amplified, and most importantly, instant melee energy back on kills with lightning strikes and Thunderclap itself. It's not unusual to get over 75% of your melee back instantly, assuming we have enough adds to kill. Starting with aspects this time around, Knockout is a must-take to start. Instant health and health regen on melee kill, and bonus damage on our melee. This works for Thunderclap and our uncharged melee. One quick note, if you haven't already, set separate keys or bindings for your uncharged and charged melee, rather than just using auto melee. This makes the build a much smoother experience, since you won't be stuck using your normal melee when you want a Thunderclap, and vice versa. Take it from a long-time player, switching away from auto melee is worth it. Second aspect, I'm choosing Diamond Lance. Diamond Lance activates on ability or stasis weapon kills, spawning a lance with a pretty short cooldown, just 7 seconds in PvE. You can either throw the lance to instantly freeze enemies or instantly shatter stasis crystals. Same goes for the slam attack if you hit your melee button. Note that if you or your ally slam a Diamond Lance, all friendly units within a short radius gain 2 stacks of frost armor for 10 seconds. This is actually our main use case for Diamond Lance. You'll be chaining Diamond Lances left and right, so be sure to pick them up, even if it's just to quickly slam and get frost armor. Unbreakable, as much as I enjoy it, just isn't proactive enough for this build, nor is the Void Overshield that needed, we'll cover that later. Consecration takes up our melee ability, so obviously that's no good. Drenger's Lash is an alright selection, second to Diamond Lance still in my opinion. Drenger's Lash is overall less versatile than Diamond Lance. It's strictly attached to your class ability for one, and while you can suspend multiple targets if they line up correctly, those suspensions don't add any damage really to our gameplay loop. Meanwhile, we get freezes, shatters, and frost armor just for using Diamond Lance. It's much more bang for your buck. Super is pretty variable here. If it's a boss encounter, Twilight Arsenal, Glacial Quake, or Thunder Crash are all decent picks. Otherwise, Blade Fury, and if you really want to, Hammer of Soul, also work just fine. I'm personally either running Blade Fury or Glacial Quake, and pairing that with Facet of Purpose for more damage resist. If you do want to run Hammer of Soul, just for Facet of Purpose giving restoration on orb pickup, I think that'd be an okay choice too. Class ability has a little bit more going on. If you're looking to use Drenger's Lash for this build, which I feel is the weaker of the two, take Small Wall for bonus weapon stats, and Big Wall if you need more defense. I don't recommend running Drenger's Lash with Thruster, at least for this build. For the Diamond Lance version of this build, you can really pick whatever you like. I'm usually running Tall Wall. Note that you can drop your class ability and stand behind it to taunt enemies while charging Thunderclap, attracting more melee enemies to you, giving you more targets to kill. Keeping up the stasis theme, grenade selection is Glacier. Both Thunderclap and Diamond Lances can instantly shatter stasis crystals, thus providing a massive AoE burst. Not to mention after that burst, you'll have a Diamond Lance waiting for you. Fragments are Purpose, Courage, Ruin, Balance, and Protection. Purpose is core in every Prismatic build. Most likely you'll be using it to get Frost Armor, Void Overshields, or Woven Mail. No brainer pick there. Courage gets us a 10% damage buff on our light abilities to enemies that are affected by Strand or Stasis debuffs. Being that Diamond Lance is going to be getting a ton of use, the benefits are huge here. Ruin gets us more damaging shatters, plain and simple. This aspect is likely the most interchangeable, especially if you're not planning on running Glacial Quake, but if you are planning on running Glacial Quake, it's a must-take. Facet of Balance is for bolstering our ability gains, since shatters, jolts, and knockout punches, which turn our normal melee into arc melees, are a regular part of our kit, we'll be constantly feeding ourselves energy back. This is the fragment that'll be topping off our melee energy to keep us constantly punching. Facet of Protection is core to any melee build, 15% damage reduction added to our damage formula. Optional fragments include Facet of Dawn, Awakening, and Grace. Facet of Dawn gives Radiant on powered melee hits, not bad, but being that this isn't the most weapon-focused build, it can fall a little short. Now, if you choose to use something like Monte Carlo, or maybe if you want to play a more cautious, weapon-focused version of this build, Dawn is a much better fit then. Facet of Awakening is another decent pick, giving us primarily stasis shards and ionic traces to keep our melee topped off. While the extra uptime is nothing to scoff at, the bonus damage from Ruin and Courage edge out the competition here, since point contact itself is getting us most of our melee back anyway. If anything, I think Awakening would be a better fit for an exotic class item version of this build. Here, it's just not as needed. Finally, Facet of Grace is always an option. Kinetic weapons can charge Transcendence really quickly, and certain kinetic exotics can also give massive amounts of super energy. Thinking Kvostov, Monte Carlo, Outbreak Perfected, all powerhouses. If you're really wanting or needing these kinds of weapons for, say, a GM or something like that, Grace is going to be a very strong pairing. Otherwise, our ability loop is keeping us on the up and up as far as our Transcendence goes, so Grace becomes optional. For our mods, core mods are Heavy-Handed, Invigoration, Absolution, Bulwark Finisher, Proximity Ward, and Powerful Attraction. Heavy-Handed is our main orb making mod. Stack these up to 2 copies at a minimum, 3 is ideal. Powerful Attraction allows us to pick up orbs of power around us, instantly activating mods like Invigoration and Absolution to keep our ability energy high. This gives us armor charge for Bulwark Finisher, giving us void overshields upon finishing an enemy. Proximity Ward is just helpful to survive. This is more needed during difficult contact like GMs, or if you're ever on special finisher duty. Getting to artifact mods. If you're watching this video outside of episode 2, take any mod that provides damage resistance, especially in close range, anything that boosts arc or stasis damage, and anything that gives ability energy, especially if it caters towards Prismatic. If you're playing this build during episode 2, Act 2, when this video is coming out, be sure to take Authorized Mods Melee for some cheap melee mods, The Thick of It and Curative Orbs for more safety in melee range, Total Carnage for finishers giving resist, Armor of Aramis since you'll be getting Frost Armor on the regular, Hail the Storm, and Conductive Cosmic Crystal. If you're used to Consecration spam, the hardest part of this build for you will be the damage difference. This is going out to all my hardcore slammers out there. This build does not have the same instant kill champion capabilities. Consecration Titan is an anomaly. Don't expect to not have to break a barrier shield because you'll just kill the barrier champion. The fun of this build is having a powerful, close range gameplay loop without outright one-shotting everything. Think high APM, AoE cleave damage, and taking advantage of massive amounts of resist to stay in the fight. 2 quick tips before we get into the damage calculations for this build. Number 1, use Diamond Lance. Run over it, slam it, throw it, do whatever you have to do. Diamond Lances are a core part of this build, and for the most part, you'll just be hitting your melee to give yourself more resistances. Do not ignore Diamond Lances, you definitely don't have to chase them, but you should be using them as much as you possibly can. Second tip, and the most important, trust your Thunderclap animation. You get 80% damage resist during and shortly after a punch. You will survive more than you think. On that note, before we end the video, let's look at some realistic examples of damage resist you can expect to have running my same setup. This formula that you're seeing, that you probably haven't seen anything like since like 8th grade, I don't know, is Destiny's damage calculation in layman's terms. 1 being the damage instance itself, each variable being a different form of damage resist, and X being our total damage resistance after the damage is taken. Promise it won't get more complicated than this. Do note that these calculations aren't including more specific resists like concussive dampener or solar resist. We're just looking at the overall damage resistance sources. So let's say we have 100 resilience, which we always should. That's 30% damage resist. Add in Facet of Protection, that's another 15%. And then let's be generous and say we have Frost Armor times 4, that's also another 18%. Throwing all of this damage into our calculation, we get a number that looks like this. That comes out to 0.51, multiply that by 100, and that's 51% damage resist. Not bad. Let's throw Thunderclap into the mix now. So Thunderclap is 80% damage resistance. We'll plug that into the end of our formula. And as you can see, that turns out to be 0.9 or 90% damage resist. This is why we want to trust our punch. We get tanky during the animation, and for some time after. Alright, so now we set up sort of a basic scenario. Let's set up our ideal scenario. 100 resilience, facet of protection, 5 stacks of frost armor, transcendence, which gives us damage resist when active, woven mail from blade fury and facet of purpose, and thunderclap itself. So when all of these conditions are met, 95.9% damage resist is what we're reaching. That's glaive shield levels of DR. The best part about this setup is that these numbers are very obtainable. The only thing that's variable in this formula at all are our frost armor stacks, say if your teammates take them from you or something like that. This isn't even counting getting void overshields from Bulwark Finisher. Here's that number, by the way. But I digress. Combine this with knockout healing, maybe their own recuperation, and you're golden. All in all, this build is tanky, high APM, and carries a lot of damage resist, with healing to keep you safe. Get in close, charge that punch, and send them packing. If you enjoyed this video or learned anything new or useful, liking and subscribing is the best way to support what I do here. If you have build suggestions or exotics that you want to see build crafted, let me know in the comments. Traveler be with you. Have a good one, Guardians.
Your warden expects great